One man stepped into a storm of bullets. What he did next rewrote the rules of survival. The Vietnam jungle didn't fight fair. It swallowed sound. It hid the enemy. And when the shooting started, it turned every direction into a death trap. American soldiers learned quickly that survival meant staying low, staying quiet, and never, ever drawing attention to yourself. But on one September morning in 1970, a single soldier would break every rule. And somehow, he'd walk away alive. The air that day was thick, heavy with moisture, the kind of heat that makes your uniform cling to your skin and your rifle feel twice its weight. Charlie Company had been moving through dense vegetation near the Kyu Sun Valley for 3 days. Routine patrol. Check for enemy activity. Report back. Nothing unusual. But in Vietnam, routine meant nothing. Death didn't follow schedules. The trap nobody expected specialist for Gary Wetzel wasn't supposed to be a hero. He was a door gunner on AUH-1 Huey helicopter. His job was simple: provide covering fire during insertions and extractions. Keep the enemy's heads down while soldiers got in or out. That morning, his crew had been ordered to evacuate wounded men from a hot landing zone. Hot meant one thing: the enemy was close, and they were shooting. The Huey dropped fast toward the clearing. Below, American soldiers were pinned down. Heavy fire coming from 3 sides. The tree line erupted with muzzle flashes. Wetzel opened up with his M60 machine gun, tracers cutting through the jungle canopy. The helicopter touched down. Wounded men scrambled toward safety, half carried by their brothers. Everything was noise. Rote awash. Gunfire. Screaming dot, then the RPG hit. The rocket-propelled grenade struck the Huey's side, and the world turned into fire and metal fragments. Wetzel felt his left arm explode. Not pain at first, just the sensation of something gone. He looked down and saw what was left. His arm hung by threads of tissue and shattered bone, barely attached to his shoulder. Blood poured. The helicopter lurched. The pilot fought to keep it steady, but they were taking too much fire. They had to lift off. Now, but 6 wounded men were still on the ground. The choice that made no sense. Wetzel could have collapsed, should have collapsed. His body was going into shock. His arm was destroyed. The crew chief was screaming at him to get down, to stay down. But Wetzel saw those men, saw them dragging themselves toward the helicopter, saw the bullets kicking up dirt around them, and he made a decision that defied every instinct of self-preservation. He grabbed his M60 with his one functioning arm. The gun weighed 23 pounds. Normally, you braced it with both hands or mounted it on a support. Wetzel had neither. He wedged the gun against the helicopter's frame and opened fire. One-handed, blood streaming down his side. The recoil tried to tear the weapon from his grip. He held on. Enemy fire intensified. They'd seen him, seen the door gunner still shooting. And they focused everything on that helicopter. Rounds punched through the thin aluminum skin. The windscreen spider-webbed. The pilot took a hit in the leg, the co-pilot in the shoulder. But Wetzel kept firing, kept the enemy from overrunning those wounded men crawling through the dirt. Asterisk inside the storm. What people don't understand about combat is how time changes. Seconds stretch, minutes compress. In that moment, Wetzel wasn't thinking about medals or bravery. He was thinking about the next burst, the next target, the next second of suppressing fire that might keep his brothers alive one moment longer. His left arm swung uselessly, spraying blood across the helicopter's interior. The pain had arrived now. White hot, overwhelming. His vision blurred at the edges, but his right hand stayed on that trigger. The M60 bucked and roared. Brass casings poured onto the deck. The barrel glowed red-hot. One by one, the wounded men reached the helicopter. Hands pulled them aboard. 2 men, 3, 4. Wetzel shifted his fire, tracking enemy positions in the tree line. 5 men, 6. The helicopter was overloaded. The engine screamed. The pilot pulled pitch, and the Huey clawed for altitude. They weren't clear yet. Small arms fire followed them up. Tracers asked through the air like deadly fireworks. Wetzel kept shooting, kept laying down covering fire even as the helicopter gained altitude. even as his consciousness began to fade. His right hand stayed on that gun until they were finally out of range. Only then did he allow himself to slump against the bulkhead. What the doctors found Field Hospital at July had seen everything. Traumatic amputations, sucking chest wounds, burns that covered half a body. But even the surgeons paused when they saw Wetzel. His left arm was attached by less than 2 inches of tissue. Bone fragments had been driven into his chest. He'd lost more than half his blood volume. The fact that he was conscious defied medical logic. The amputation was inevitable. They removed what remained of his arm just below the shoulder, but the damage ran deeper. Shrapnel had torn through his side. Fragments lodged near his spine. The surgery lasted 7 hours. When he finally woke, morphine clouding his thoughts, the first thing he asked about was his crew. His brothers. The men they'd pulled out, all 6 had survived. The pilot had survived. The co-pilot had survived. Everyone who'd been on that helicopter had made it. Against odds that didn't make sense. Against fire that should have brought them down. And the reason the doctors told him was that he'd kept shooting. Kept the enemy suppressed those crucial extra seconds. Kept them from getting a clear shot at the overloaded, struggling helicopter. The history nobody told you Vietnam was a war of helicopters. More than any conflict before it. The Huey became the symbol of American presence in Southeast Asia. Its distinctive hop-hop sound meant salvation to soldiers on the ground. It meant extraction, medical evacuation, resupply. Between 1965 and 1973, helicopter crews flew millions of sorties. Thousands never came home. Door gunners had the most exposed position, sitting in an open door. No armor, no protection, just a machine gun and the thin aluminum skin of the aircraft between them and enemy fire. The casualty rate was staggering. Some crews calculated their odds of survival in weeks, not months. The average door gunner in a hot zone had a life expectancy measured in combat hours. But they kept flying, kept going back, because when American soldiers were surrounded, bleeding, dying, someone had to get them out. The helicopter crews were often the only thing standing between a wounded man and death. They knew the risks. They flew anyway. Wetzel's actions weren't unique because of their rarity. They were unique because he survived. Dozens of door gunners had stayed at their guns while wounded. Most didn't make it. Most bled out in flight or took additional hits that killed them. Wetzel had somehow threaded an impossible needle. Stayed conscious, maintained fire. Held on long enough. The one thing that changed everything was what made the difference. Not his courage, though he had that. Not his training, though that mattered. It was something simpler, something almost forgotten in modern warfare. He saw their faces. Those 6 wounded men weren't statistics, weren't tactical considerations. They were men he knew, men he'd flown with, men who'd shared rations and jokes and fear in the weeks before. When you see the face of the person you're saving, something changes. The pain becomes secondary. The fear becomes irrelevant. There's only the objective. Get them out. Keep them alive. Military theorists study tactics and strategy. They analyze fire superiority and suppression patterns. But they often miss the human element, the bond between soldiers that transcends training. Wetzel didn't stay at his gun because of duty or orders. He stayed because he knew what it meant to be that soldier on the ground, knew the desperate hope when you hear rotor blades overhead, knew the terror when the helicopter starts to leave without you. He couldn't let that happen, not while he could still pull a trigger. Asterisk, the aftermath that nobody expected. President Richard Nixon presented Gary Wetzel with the Medal of Honor on November 13, 1971. The citation detailed his actions with clinical precision, gallantry, intrepidity, conspicuous courage. But the words couldn't capture what it felt like, couldn't describe the weight of that M60 in one hand, the blood, the noise, the simple determination to not let his brothers die. Wetzel struggled afterward, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with the gap between that moment and normal life. How do you go back to ordinary concerns after you've crossed that threshold? After you've learned what you're capable of when everything's stripped away except will? He lived quietly, worked, raised a family. rarely spoke about Vietnam unless asked directly. The missing arm was obvious. The scars ran deeper, but he didn't see himself as special. Didn't think he'd done anything extraordinary. In his mind, he'd simply done what needed doing. What any of his brothers would have done in his place, maybe he was right. Maybe every soldier carries the capacity, that willingness to sacrifice everything for the person next to them. Vietnam brought out that quality 10,000 times. In helicopters, in ambushes, in desperate last stands. Most of those moments went unrecorded. Most of those soldiers never got medals. They just did their job and hoped to survive. Asterisk. What it means now, Gary Wetzel's story isn't about war. Not really. It's about what people become when everything else falls away, when there's no time for philosophy or doubt. Just action. Just choice. He lost his arm. He carried scars. But 20 men flew out of that landing zone because one person refused to quit. The pilot, the co-pilot, the 6 wounded, the crew, and all the others those men would go home to. All the children they'd raise, all the lives they'd touch. One man, one impossible decision, and a storm of bullets that somehow missed. That's the story they don't tell you about war. Not the grand strategy, not the political reasons, but the moment when one person looks at another and says, "Not today. You're not dying today. Not while I'm still breathing." Gary Wetzel walked through Gunfire to save 20 men, and in doing so, he showed us something we need to remember. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's not some special quality reserved for heroes. It's simply the decision to act, to keep going, to hold on 1 second longer when every instinct screams to let go. The jungle doesn't remember. The landing zone is overgrown now. Nature reclaimed what war tore apart. But somewhere in the world, descendants of those 20 men are living their lives, building, creating, loving. Because one September morning in 1970, a door gunner with one arm refused to stop shooting. That's what courage looks like. That's what it costs. And that's why we tell these stories. Not to glorify war, but to remember what people are capable of when it matters most. The helicopter lifted off through a storm of bullets, and somehow, impossibly, everyone made it home.